welcome once again, everybody. It's terrific to be with you in this form, and we're about 2 months away, I hope, from actually being together in Ojai in that magical setting, and really the best of company, three of whom are with us tonight. Soprano Julia Bullock, pianist Conor Hanick, and stage director, choreographer, co-founder of AMOC, and artistic director Zack Winokur. They are the creative team, but not the only members of the team behind what is one of the central events of this year's festival, which is a reconceived staging or approach, theatricalization of Olivier Messiaen's song cycle, Harawi, for soprano and piano, and they will be joined by the amazing choreographer and dancers, or Schraiber and Bobbi Jean Smith, also key members of AMOC, along with Conor, Zack, and Julia. If I can risk embarrassing the three of you by a few updates. Julia has had a banner year, like most of her recent years. She began with an extraordinary personal triumph in Handel's Theodora at the Royal Opera Covent Garden, and most recently in New York, brought Michel van der A's tech multimedia opera Upload, along with Roderick Williams. And later this year, the 2021 Ojai Festival and the 2022 Ojai Festival music directors meet, because John Adams's newest opera, which is Antony and Cleopatra, will premiere at the San Francisco Opera, and John is writing the role of Cleopatra for Julia. Conor, we met and had a lovely conversation earlier in the series about Hans Otto's Book of Sounds. Just looking at Conor's upcoming calendar, two pretty wonderful events. The premiere of a new set of works by Nico Muhly at a New York Philharmonic nightcap concert. And then at the Gilmore Festival in Michigan, the world premiere of a brand new piece for piano and percussion written by Taishan Sori, another hugely important figure in recent Ojai history, including with Julia some years ago, and that's with Sandbox Percussion. So great things before Conor comes to Ojai, and then not very far away to Santa Barbara for his role as director of piano at the Music Academy of the West. And Zack is having a Tristan year. The Messian Harawi is part of Messiaen's Tristan trilogy, which we'll talk about in a minute. But after Ojai, Zack will be directing Wagner's Tristan and Isolde at the Santa Fe Opera. So a big year ahead between the two festivals. And I should say, this production of Messiaen's Harawi that we will be seeing for the first time in Ojai will then travel later this summer to the Aix-en-Provence Festival in France. So lots of exciting things ahead, and as we like to think, we get there first in Ojai. Julia, Conor, Zack, huge welcome. It's just so nice to be with you, even in Zoom form. Let me just do a really quick background. Harawi was written by Messiaen in 1945, and it turned out to be the first of three pieces blending sort of the transfiguration of love in death, the so-called Tristan trilogy, of which the best-known piece is the Turangalila Symphony, which came after Harawi, as well as Cinq Rachants. And we'll talk more about the circumstances at the time of its writing, but it's a nearly hour-long song cycle, 12 songs for voice and piano. We'll talk about text and other elements, but I'd love to ask each of you why Harawi, how you came to be drawn to it, and then the idea behind this particular realization of Harawi and the questions it raises.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can begin that. It was back in 2000, I guess, I want to say 14, 15. I was already starting to program some of Messiaen's music on recitals, and of course came across his last song cycle, Harawi, and just started to translate it myself, do some research on it. And initially I thought this was a project that I would present at the Met Museum. And it was those were my first conversations with Met Live Arts. And then I wanted to do it as a shared program between two singers and two pianists. I thought maybe that would be, to speak, as you spoke about, this love and death duality, the for Messiaen, the importance of spirituality and sensuality being so explicit in his music. So I thought that maybe that would be a really interesting way to approach this work, also with staging it. The Met project got postponed and postponed because of my schedule. And then during that time, I met Zack Winokur. He mentioned the idea of starting a company, a kind of cooperative of artists. And I thought, great, that sounds great. Let's see if it materializes into anything. Yeah, as the years went on, I became friends and introduced with Bobbi, Jene, and or Schraiber, who are also part of AMOC. And at that point, I had done enough performances and recitals where I was singing alone for about an hour long, and I thought, okay, maybe I can handle this, and maybe it'd be more interesting to have a pianist, a vocalist, and then two dancers. So yeah, this project really has been several years in the making, and we've just been waiting for the opportunity to find the right people to embody it. Yeah, so actually it was just an intuitive draw to Messiaen's expression. That was the initial reason for wanting to do this. And then it has deepened from there.
Zack, do you want to take it from there and just introduce us to what's at issue in this piece? And as Julia already mentioned, this amazing Messiaen blend of sensuality and spirituality, but there are any number of intersections, including cultural ones, at work here.
Yeah, I mean, this really was something, I think it's probably the first project that Julia and I ever talked about doing together when we met. And I actually didn't know the piece, and then sort of came to know it, and also had sort of an intuitive draw to it. And you know, at first, in thinking about this opportunity to do it at Ojai, it seemed kind of fortuitous, since there was, like, for me, that I was also working on Tristan, and I thought, okay, well, you know, these things seem to be very related. But it's interesting to me because we're still working on it now, and actually it seems less and less related to Tristan to me than to many other things that feel much more on the ground and much more contemporary and much more real, and also much more ancient, or ancient and from other cultures. And I think that one of the things that was really important to Julia, and also to all of us in bringing this piece to life, was about, it's in the title. Harawi is a Quechuan word, which is a language family from the indigenous people of Peru. And it uses parts of that language in sort of onomatopoetic ways, and also imagery from that culture. And I think one of the things that we've been engaged in is a series of conversations with people who, indigenous Peruvian people who know this material, who know the Quechuan language, and who are also in their own contemporary practices of art making. And we've been deeply ensconced in conversations with all of those people to sort of come together and figure out exactly, where this came from on every side, both the kind of Quechuan Peruvian side, as well as what was happening with Messiaen sort of colliding with this cultural current. And then, a word that's come up many times, which Julia uses a lot, which is how do we find multiple resonances in who we are, intertwining our histories with this older work that is in fact built on even older material.
Maybe a quick sort of historical placing. This was, of course, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and Messiaen had been a prisoner of war during World War II, and he wrote the quartet for the end of time. His interest in non-European cultures, of course, in wartime France and occupied France was limited to books. And the source material for this was a collection of Peruvian folk melodies that he found. And I wonder if, I was just thinking about this today, thinking about this piece, is in a way, some of the draw of these non-European cultures in the aftermath of World War II is just trying to connect to a world different than the world that had gone to pieces that he lived in. Do you think, any of you, do you think there's anything to that? Or it's just more his general curiosity about the world?
I mean, it's hard. One thing, Conor, feel free to jump in any moment, because Conor's read a lot of, well, I don't know a lot, but he's read some biographies about Messiaen. I've also read several books of his over the years, and one thing that I have always adored about Messiaen is that he is never trying to divorce any part of his experience from his art expression. And so I am sure that I can imagine if that question was posed to him, he would find a way to relate and connect those things. The realities of violence and death, and also trying to release one's attachment to familiar environments and moving from a place of being grounded in one reality, shifting perspective, and then allowing oneself to feel embracing of things that are beyond and even, to the cosmic level. It's like that is all present in his poetry, it's present in the music, and it is incredibly explicit. So yes, Sarah, yes.
Yeah,
Conor,
just jump in there to piggyback on that a bit. I mean, I agree entirely with what Julia just said, and I have sort of come to think about Harawi and Messiaen's interest in Andean culture, and it kind of along similar lines as he later expressed interest in something much more kind of banal, which is just like American natural parks, or like, American parks, the natural wonders of America, which then sort of fueled this inspiration for De Kenyon Ojai, his late sort of piano concerto orchestra masterpiece. But I guess both of those things, while wildly different, to me feel like they're sort of fulfilling a similar need that Messiaen has, which is to find modes of expression or sort of potentialities of expression through these other things that magnify or enable his own language and his own sort of philosophical outlook, which could not be contained by one person, cannot be contained by one world or one universe, but to the extent possible had to incorporate all of these other vessels to kind of express things that weren't possible by his language alone, if that makes sense.
That also just reminds me of this word that came up that has been really powerful for me from one of our collaborators, Karen Castagnon, who's a textile artist who lives in Berlin with Peruvian roots. And she's also been acting as our translator in these conversations. And one word that she used was like mnemonic, that, you know, one of her interests in her practice is creating objects that sort of you can touch and evoke memory. And in many ways, that is what this piece is to me. And one of the beautiful things about, you know, what to Conor's point is that like the sounds of the piano are like the sounds of space, you know, like he's really trying to describe the indescribable, or the very, very material that we have so much trouble articulating with words. And we also have the presence of the voice that also shatters when it doesn't work anymore. And then I think it's partly lifted up and or completed by the presence of dance, and and that being not just Bobbi and Amor, but also Julia and Conor, that sort of weave together into a really sensorial experience that is trying to capture as much as possible through as many modes as possible.
Messiaen himself wrote the texts, and as Zack said, they use Quechuan words, often as pure sound for their sort of sound color, like so much of his music, but in some other places more referential. Could you introduce the text to us? What do the texts encompass, and what's in a way the journey of the piece through its texts?
All right, we're all smiling because because we've spent hours and hours talking through this piece and sharing our readings of the poetry alone, then how that is amplified with the music, and again, these like the repetitions that happen, the broken languages, broken words, the broken phrases, and so yeah, I mean, and as we are working on the staging now, we have a structure that I think are committed to at this point, but it's hard because we haven't. Anyway,
we should just point out that we are literally in the middle of rehearsals right now, and this is like our one day off. So everything's very present and also highly changeable.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how to summarize this other than to say, well, actually, Conor, you summarized it really well yesterday, with the journey that at least the speaker goes through in this piece.
Yesterday was so
what
long
did
ago.
I say yesterday?
No, I think my general feeling about the piece, and for me, it's been really important to, like, this piece is anything but general, but it's so multifaceted and so layered and complex that it's often very grounding for me to just to have like a very simple like A to B concept. And for me, that's like it's a journey from basically earth to abyss, in like the most like both literal and figurative sense. I mean, the whole piece begins on a park bench and it ends in like it's not blackness, it's like the absence of matter, if I can say something like that on a Zoom call. But each step in its own way is sort of levitating. It's getting further and further away from like the very human experience that begins the piece. And the poetry sort of maps onto that, and of course the music maps onto that, and the structure of the songs maps onto that in a again a very general way. It sort of is anchored by these 3 songs that are it's almost like a monothematic material in each of these songs. Bonjour Toi, the second song, which effectively is the first real song of the whole cycle, and then Adieu in the middle, which is sort of the fulcrum point of the whole cycle, and then the final Into Black, which all uses this theme of love that Messiaen identified, and to me serve as I was sort of thinking about this when we were last talking. They're sort of like the arias of the piece, if I can. They're a split second in time that last for 5 minutes or an eternity, however you think about it. And then the songs that couch that are these sort of more transitional motion songs. So the first 4 are going from the park bench to the eternity, and then from there it's from eternity into blackness. Yeah, when you talk about it that way, it's very Tristan-esque, but again, it is that, and it's kind of not that at the same time.
In reading through a conversation book with Messiaen earlier today, I actually found a quote of his that exactly parallels what you're saying. In this conversation book with Claude Samuel, he was asked about Tristan, and he said, basically, it's not really the myth of Tristan and Isolde any longer. And he said, and I quote, "I've preserved only the idea of a fatal and irresistible love, a love that transcends the body, transcends even the limitations of the mind, and grows to a cosmic scale." So that pretty exactly parallels what you're talking about. It's sort of an abstraction of the journey of Tristan and Isolde on a much more kind of cosmic and spiritual plane. Mm-hmm. Conor, let me ask you, how you place sort of the musical language of this piece. It's at a key moment in his own growth at that point. He's in his late 30s. Although I'm also so tempted to say all Messiaen to me sounds only as if Messiaen could have written it, that at every moment it just sounds like his unique musical vocabulary. How do you place this, especially relative to some of his other music that you've played?
Yeah, I mean, to your first question of how I came to this piece, I came to this piece much after I played a lot of his other music, including the Avant Regard, which precedes this piece, movements from the catalog, which postdate this piece, From the Canyons to the Stars, which is one of the final pieces. And I have to say that the language in this piece kind of belies its chronological placement in a lot of ways. It feels extremely experimental in ways that some of the other pieces feel a little bit more staid in their sort of musical technique, if I can say that. I mean, he was writing this at the same time that he was composing his like massive treatise about his musical language. So I think a lot of those ideas are being codified in real time in this piece in ways that they're sort of being explored in the Avant Regard earlier. and I think a lot of the most experimental music in this piece for me is the cosmic music, the music that is, as Zach was alluding to, trying to sound like something that is impossible to hear. And he uses the most inventive, like kind of counterintuitive modes of composing for these portions. Things that are very sort of contraption-like, that have internal processes that sort of unfold, but then the result is this total space age floating anti-gravity music. And to me, it's one of the most remarkable achievements in this piece, that the language can be both so technical and precise and considered, but the musical affect can be exactly that. I mean, you don't hear any of this. It's just like the most extraordinary experiential music that I think he wrote, especially during this period. And I just wanted to say one more thing, not to take up too much oxygen, but the use of birdsong also is so interesting in this piece. Again, it's kind of primitive in the earlier pieces, especially something like the Quartet for the End of Time, that has birds in it, but is very like two-dimensional. And it's not quite at the wazo exotique level of sophistication, but it's very precise and very virtuoso, and is integrated into the language in, I think, kind of remarkable ways. It's some of the most fun music to play, I think, in the whole cycle for me.
One of my favorite things about it is in the piano part at several points, it says, comme un oiseau, like a bird, or as a bird, which really just leaves it to the imagination of the pianist to realize like a bird. There's one other, and the emotional range of the piece is pretty extraordinary, because it really runs the gamut from kind of a wild desperation to violence to an otherworldly serenity to ecstatic quality, and all of it just completely woven into a whole. It's always a little tricky to tie biography to musical works, but this was also a remarkable. Yeah, shall we?
No, yeah, no, Ara, I think it's actually really important too, because it's, well, honestly, it's a part of the kind of research and development process. I feel certainly for Zach, Conor, and myself, with every work. And also, I think it's very easy for people to forget that these were human beings who wrote this music. They were trying to find a way to express and share whatever their obsession was at that time. And like most of us, we're all, you know, many of us are trying to find ways to express and share and communicate. So, but there are some people who take the time to transcribe it. And so, yeah, I think it's actually really important to place the work of its creation, because it makes it very real.
Do you want to just take it from there, what we're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in addition to this being written in 1945 after the crisis, like his own crisis inside of the war, as well as just globalized war and that crisis, he was also having a very personal crisis with his first wife, Claire Delbos, who basically was suffering from losing her memory after a very kind of normal operation. And I think that one of the things that we've been talking about is how this is both a kind of, well, that a lot of this is like a farewell to her, but also kind of a hello to the next love. And it's also kind of evident in the fact that, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically there was no, this is like the first secular subject that he's taking on. And he's such a devout Christian, and you know, there's a lot of other symbology, and there's basically tons of program notes, tons of dedications on every other piece. And for this one, there is neither dedication nor program notes. And he's taking on the secular subject of human love. And it does go into a cosmic place. And I think what we're really trying to find is where it's most on the ground. And, you know, and also just imagining what I mean, for me, this has been a very important thing to think about is, you know, so that it doesn't become too mythological, but it really stays human. You know, what is it to maintain connection with someone who is losing their memory? And as they're moving through time with you, all of the things that you've created with them before are going away. And what does that mean? What does that feel like? How do you maintain, you know, relationship? And for me, part of the kind of cosmic stuff is also thinking like, how does that person see the world? And how do you work to expand your perception of something in order to access the way that they're seeing, so that you can stay connected? You know, as well as just what is this beyond the body, in the hope that we might reunite in some other place. And I think all of those things are here. And again, sort of turning it from a duet into a quartet means we can really amplify those human dimensions so much more. And that to me feels, to Julia's point, like a lot of what we're doing here, which is like remembering that we are people, that this was written by people, and that while this, you know, seems to describe things beyond people, it's us just doing our best to try.
And let me just fill in what Zack was referring to. Messiaen's first wife, Claire Delbo, had at that point largely been institutionalized because of this strange and heartbreaking ailment in which, as a result of an operation, there was this terrible loss of memory, and she just faded, disappeared in a sense while living. And Messiaen's previous song cycle, Poème pour me, had been this great declaration of love for his first wife, Claire Delbo. And to complicate matters, he was increasingly drawn to a student who would become the great champion of his music, and much later in life become his second wife, Yvonne Loriot, the pianist, who was the unshakable champion of Messiaen, both as a pianist and as keeper of the flame. So there's that dimension ever present in the work. Let's
if I could just mention one slightly melodramatic detail to that, which is that Messiaen and Loriot met in about 1942, and Loriot from that point forward was essentially the pianist that premiered all of his music, except for Harawi. And in fact, she never performed Harawi until after his first wife died in 1959, which seems like an eternity to me after writing this piece in 1945. And then 14 years later, this tragedy kind of concludes, and this other very like happy scene commences. But I found it really interesting because, you know, Loriot is memorizing the entire catalogue des oiseaux, all of the Vent Regard, doing Oiseau Exotique and Turanga Lila Symphony, literally the entire repertoire that Messiaen composed from 1942 through the rest of his life, but she never performed Harawi until the late 60s, which melodramatic detail, but interesting to me.
Telling. Let's it's the expressive world of this piece is so wide-ranging that any one excerpt only gives you one selected view, but we've chosen just one song to listen to and excerpt, which is the 10th song. And if you want to just introduce us to where we are in the cycle emotionally and kind of the place of this song in the progression. And then Julia, I don't know if your translation is handy, but maybe you could tell us the text as well. The song is called Amor, wazo d'étoiles, love, bird of stars, the bird of the star.
Yeah.
Every aspect of Messiaen in one title: love, bird, and the stars.
Yeah. So this song comes right after one of, well, I think kind of the ecstatic high point of the piece, and which is the staircase repeats gestures of the sun. So we've gotten, like, we were talking about the piece kind of rising up. There was an act of rising and then again an arrival point or some sort of plane. And this lovebird of star, or Amor, wazo d'étoiles, as we were going through the piece, we each were like providing sort of what is our impression of the work. And I think, Zach, you were the one who said, it feels like falling up. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like after this swirling, wild, ecstatic, amazing. Also, he speaks about love and joy in the most vibrant, vital way just before. And then there's this stillness and ease and a relaxation. And yes, it's like the sensation of falling up. And the words say, bird of star, your eye that sings towards the stars, your head upside down under the sky, your eye of star, falling chains towards the stars, shortest path from the shade to the sky. All the birds of stars, far from the tableau of hands, sing, star, augmented silence of sky, my hands, your eye, your neck, the sky.
Before we hear it, Messiaen cites a specific surrealist painting called Seeing is Believing by the British artist Roland Penrose, painted in 1937. And Fiona, if we could for a moment share screen, there is the painting that Messiaen cites as the inspiration and the image, not only for this particular song, but perhaps for the piece as a whole. And Zach, as you said, it's almost a literal falling upwards. So with that as introduction, let's listen to a recording chosen actually by Julia, Conor, and Zach as a recording they admire of this 10th song from Messiaen's Harawi. The song is Amor, wazo d'étoiles. very beautiful performance by a Danish duo. And if you're curious about at least an introduction to the work, I think that is a good place to begin. When we were preparing for this talk, the three of you sent not only the suggestion for that movement, but also something that wouldn't remotely have been available to Messiaen, which is an actual glimpse into the real Quechuan culture. Messiaen in 1945 was limited to a book of carefully notated Andean songs, but that's as close as he could come to the experience. And Zack, tell us about this little clip that we see that actually goes to the Andean Harawi experience, and maybe in what ways the contact with it and the access to it informs or helps flesh out your realization of the piece.
Yeah, I mean, way before this conversation started, one of the things that, one of the movements of the piece is called dunduchil, and it's a word that is meant to sound like the sounds of the ankle bells, like when you hit your heel and then your toes. And one of the early reasons to incorporate dance into this version was to think about a different way of hearing sound, of hearing movement. And I think one of the things that we've been having a lot of conversation about is also what in this, in the traditional kind of genre of Harawi, I think we made a lot of assumptions about like what Messiaen was doing. Like, was he just taking this? Was he reformatting it? Was he knowledgeable about what was going on? Was it towards the similar goals or not? Did he just like the sound of it? I mean, we just had a lot of questions, and I think we still do. We can't talk to him. But one of the things that's really interesting to me is how many parallels there seem to really be about giving voice to objects and flowers and stars and nature, not just talking about them, in fact, never talking about them, but giving them voice. Another thing is how the voices often are meant to sound like they're extending the instruments, and also how words are in the language also onomatopoeic, like they describe what they are. And I think one of the kind of like early parts of our conversation was really saying, it doesn't matter. We're not interested in having a conversation in this production around whether or not it was good or bad, but rather how he was meeting this material that he had access to and how we therefore meet that material.
And so just in trying to answer some of, or not even answer it, just explore some of these questions around appropriation, I reached out to these two women who have an artistic practice within Harawi, and which has a lot of, when we talk about Quechuan culture, there's so much diversity even within that culture. And so from Peru to Bolivia to Colombia, Ecuador, I mean, just from across the world, the practice of music making and the people and the place where they are making the music. So one of the pieces that Luz shared with us, this is how she described it when she sent this video to us. Singing, music, dance, and the performing / staging of all these aspects form a unity based on diversity. Singing is a form of communication. The voice is the extension or continuation of the musical instrument. Dance and performance are also an extension of the musical instrument and the voice. The film still shows women covering their mouths with their right hands. According to Edith Ramos Guerriera, a soprano singer from Araviri, Puno, this is not done for acoustic reasons, but it obeys a traditional movement protocol of these regions. And so where this particular Harawi is from Chungi, and there was a major genocide in the 1980s, and this is a video that was filmed in memorial of that genocide and of that time.
So just a glimpse into the source material of the tradition that, as represented in a book of Peruvian folk songs, became a source of inspiration for Messiaen and now becomes part of the knowledge and information that the artists of AMOC incorporate into their realization of the piece and help inform their realization of the piece. Messiaen's Harawi will be performed on the Friday night of this year's Ojai Festival, on Friday, June 10th, in a staging by Zack Winokur, and with choreography and the participation of Bobbi Jean Smith and Schraiber, two remarkable dancers who are also members of AMOC, and of course, Julia Bullock and Conor Hanick. I want to thank all three of you, and via long distance to Bobbi Jean and as well. We just can't wait to experience this piece in Ojai and experience the results of your work and thought on this piece. We can take a few minutes if anyone has any questions about what we've talked about. And I just wanted to throw out one observation. The song that we heard from the Messiaen, the 10th song, even though it's written in 1945, to my ears has a kinship with the music of the angel in Messiaen, Saint-Francois, Saint Francis, and in just one of those lovely things that make our world come full circle. Julia first came to the Ojai Festival in 2011 as part of a group of young singers brought and mentored by Dawn Upshaw. And Dawn memorably has really embodied in every way for modern audiences the role of the angel in Messiaen Saint-Francois. But I'm also struck by how unshakable Messiaen's language was almost 40 years apart, and his mode of expression. We can switch to gallery view. Please, you can unmute yourself at this point and shout out a question or put it in the chat. There was a lovely observation about a recording by Flair Barron of Dundu Chill, which is available on YouTube. Thanks, Winston. Any other thoughts? Raleigh?
Okay, I'm unmuted. You know, this is really a terrific opportunity for us. I'm very excited by it. But my question is, I know that Messiaen had his piano muse, because that's very clear, even though it wasn't for this piece. But did he ever have a voice muse?
I do not know.
Isn't that weird? I haven't looked that up.
Well, no, I mean, I never heard it, but I think he must have.
I mean, he wrote 3 large song cycles. I mean, there's the Poème pour me, there's Chant de terre, de ciel, where he also, both of those cycles are referencing the relationship to his wife. There's one song in particular in Chant de terre et de ciel that references his son. And while with that, his relationship with God, all interwoven together. And Harawi is the first time where it's not autobiographical in that very explicit way. I think because of some of the reasons that we talked about. So yeah, that's just something I need to look up, and I will hopefully have an answer either tomorrow or by the time we get to Ojai, Raleigh.
There is the dedicatee or the first performer of this cycle, but I don't think she remained a kind of central muse and inspiration. The name turns up in a handful of works around that time, but certainly not in the same sort of extended and intense lifelong way that Yvonne Loriot did as a pianist.
And I don't think that the voice is always the same. That he wrote, I think he wrote for different voices, not always the same voice. But I mean, that's not my skill. So, Julia, take it from where you take it.
No, I mean, yeah, I don't have that much to add, I guess, other than that a lot of the times when I've heard Messiaen's music performed by singers, there's a real hardness and rigidness that is articulated. And I think the reason for that is, one, the material itself is difficult. You have to pay very clear attention to the rhythmic structure because that is essential. But also it's like, really, when I hear his music, there's such flexibility, there's fluidity, there's, yes, sensuality. And I mean, some of these songs literally just read to me as amazing jazz ballads, or as lullabies, or as unleashings of one's entire being and not having enough space to claim, and so screaming is the only option. It's like that, and it's been really awesome. I guess just now, I'm glad that I waited. Personally, I'm glad that I waited to take this cycle on, because I think I had a lot of internal pressure and desire to like present it in a particular way, and now I can just bring myself forward more. I feel more completely forward as a person and singer, so that feels really good.
Thank you so much.
That was also, Julia, a wonderful description of the range of emotion and expression in this cycle. It's all there and then some. Just huge personal thanks to the three of you for the pleasure of working together and the incredible rewards of what's to come. Julia, Zack, Conor, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.
And thanks everybody for joining us, and see you very soon.